good afternoon. We welcome you back to our third panel for the day. So, we'll be having an interesting discussion on how aligned are the government and private sectors in the edtech space. For this, I would like to invite Shree Vishwakarma Skill University, Professor Dr. R.S. Rathore, Senior Research Officer at Niti Aayog, Mr. Piyush, the co-founder and Chief Business Officer of Simplilearn, Mr. Kashyap Dalal, and finally, our moderator for the panel, the advisor EdTech and Entrepreneurship and the Entrepreneur in Residence, UNCEPT, Mr. Manish Upadhyay. Manish sir, over to you.
Great. Thanks, Karan. And I welcome all the panelists once again. I will begin with the first round of discussion, which is around NEP, EdTech, and its effective implementation. And for the purpose of today's session, we will keep the focus on EdTech. While NEP has so many things to talk about, we will focus on EdTech because the agenda is EdTech, and we'll be very specific and on that agenda. Uh, just to lay the context, we've seen tremendous tailwinds in the recent time post NEP's launch, which is COVID, which is not supposed to be there, but it is a big tailwind which has pushed the edtech cost in a very very significant way. Funding of edtech, I think, result of it, a lot of edtech unicorns that are coming, unicorns as people call it, they are in the horizon. I think that has led to very interesting 21st century skills related innovative edtech startups to come in, which may further the NAP cause in a significant way. The Apna.co that I want a special mention of Apna because it's no, it is a representation from skilling industry per se, though obviously it's more on the recruitment line, but still I think skilling first you can say truly skilling oriented unicorn where skill and blue collar workers are equally represented, including white collars. That has happened. And NEP has mentioned about, and I think that's a segue to Piyush, which is NEP has spoken about National Education Technology Forum, National Research Foundation to push research effort in technology, National Assistance Center or PARAC. So there is the things that been recommended by NEP, but I would like to just ask Piyush, from a Niti Aayog perspective, from a government perspective, how are they looking at NEP, EdTech, and its implementation at an overall level? Over to you, Piyush.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Manish. So what I'll do is I'll try to set a context of very briefly about NEP. What is the reform agenda where we're driving, and how the tech component fits in to achieve those ambitious targets that have been set up in NEP. So overall, if you see both in higher education and in school education, um, maybe the NEP 2020 is the first of its kind document which has humbly accepted that there is a learning crisis within the country. So that's a brave, very humble and brave step by the national education policy to admit that kind of the crisis or the fact that's there, which has been brought to notice by multiple sources, be it the governmental report of NAS or the other reports. So that's where the entire reform is focused towards. There are a lot of structural reforms that have been talked of. At the same time, the value of personalized learning, like each child or for that matter, a student in higher education, they would have a different way of learning, and they would be at very different levels in terms of the learning outcomes, right? So even within a classroom, you'll find there is a spectrum of students, each lying at a very different level. Now the challenge is the teacher. He or she has to deliver the lecture to the entire class, and the only learning or teaching aid material that's there in the classroom is that of a textbook. And that's become the entire the way we which, for the matter of fact, is not targeted at the right level. So that's where the technology component comes in, right? So using the technology, you could personalize your learning. You could target a particular segment, a particular group in your classroom who's lagging behind, or somebody is actually doing exceptionally good in your classroom, and would not want that particular child to stay behind to be at the same level where the other classroom is. You would want to provide some extra avenues for the child to be able to grow further. So that's where that's the entire discussion, the principle and the rationale behind going big on the technology aspect of it. That's the rationale. That's what I'd say. Now coming back to the the things, the schemes, or the various announcements that's there in the national education policy. What have been the updates there? So the first thing that has already been done is something called NDR, which is National Digital Education Architecture, which has already been released for school education. The basic idea is that there are plenty of edtech players out there, and they have developed like really world-class content, which are personalized and could solve this learning challenge. So what happens is with the NDR platform, you bring your content, you could actually plug in, provided there are a certain set of principles and a specification which has been let down by the NDR. Um, so if you comply by those basic, it's basically a quality check. You want to create a content like this, there should be the specifications. You want to bring a platform or particular tool, the specification should be this. The idea is to bring interoperability between different sort of platforms that exist, right? So right now, if you see, NIOS also offers some sort of videos. Then there are multiple edtech partners who are bringing videos, but they might not be available on the same platform. As a the base platform, and you plug in and provide your content, and it's basically more like a open field where the choosers could go and pick whatever the courses and the various products that they would like to go for. So that's the basic a foundation architecture has been laid down. The same is being done for higher education. Niti Aayog, being a member of that implementation committee, we do actively participate there and provide our inputs. We are also in touch with a lot of tech players. They provide their concerns, like what to do and how to be able to better integrate them within the system. So that's all considerations are going into the development of NDR for higher education, which is most likely in the coming months we'll see that architecture coming out. So once that is done, then we talk about rolling out different initiatives that Niti talks about.
Yeah, no, thanks. Piyush, a follow-up on that is from an implementation perspective beyond India and other implementation. If you look at a ground level, at a school level, at a higher ed university level, what's the feedback you are getting? And from an implementation perspective, what's the kind of interest? So, I keep hearing a lot of things from various school owners, principals, etc., etc. But what's your measure from a Niti Aayog perspective? Where would you say that we are in terms of NEP implementation?
Right. So as I mentioned, there are two aspects of it. One, there should be a guiding principle, overarching structure now, which is already in place. That's one. Two, coming back to be able to access digital education, we'll have to have digital infrastructure in place, right at the facility level, which is schools or colleges, right? So in terms of schools, you would find like mostly in the secondary schools will find the ICT infrastructure because of the ICT as school scheme of Government of India. Now that particular scheme has now been extended till class sixth, right? So gradually you will find more and more computer labs set up in schools. Similarly, on the higher education front, there is a different policy of Government of India, where they are trying to have some innovation through RUSA and some other schemes, and they have been trying to build up basic computer labs where the foundational skills in digital literacy and more uses of ICT based education could happen, right? So that's from the digital preparedness point of view. Still, there is a long way to go. If you see, like only 23% of the schools in India are having computer labs, right? The internet penetration is only 11%. So it's all public data out there on UDICE.
Yeah.
But gradually, there's a lot of push towards bringing more and more digital infrastructure. And because of the COVID pandemic, things have accelerated, and various innovative ways of imparting ICT based education or digital education is being taking place. There is a model which we tried out here with the aspirational district program of Niti Aayog, which happened in the aspirational district of Baka, Bihar, which is near Gaya. So from the cost point perspective, just having a LCD in the classroom and integrated that classroom within the lesson plan of the teacher actually helps. And there was a third party evaluation which happened and provided a lot of promising results in terms of improved learning outcomes. So that's one of the innovation. Rather than setting up lab, you only have one LCD TV which could be shared within the school, one smart class. You could reach out to more and more schools and more colleges in the same budget that you are just spend on having a computer. So given our current situation with the financial situation as well as the current digital preparedness, we are trying out a lot of innovations to be able to scale such kind of education in India. And going forward with the BharatNet program, will be saturating in let's say next 2-3 years. years will be able to have internet connection in colleges and schools throughout India. And as I already mentioned, there's a lot of impetus on providing more and more digital infrastructure in schools. So, considering this, there is a kind of inflection point. We'll see a lot of digital education actually happening in the schools and colleges going forward.
Great. Thanks, Piyush. Dr. Rathore, talking about especially the segment of skilling, and when we when I talk to people about skilling, somehow people also differentiate between lifelong learning model and skilling being more focused towards blue collar, that's the impression, while lifelong learning more focused towards white collar. Wow. I just want to ask one, from a skilling university perspective, uh, how are you looking at NEP, EdTech, and its implementation, and this whole debate about what is lifelong learning and what is skilling, what is blue collar versus white collar? Your perspective on that.
Thank you, Manish. So, before answering to what you asked specifically to the scaling ecosystem, just I would like to extend the discussion actually, which Piyush was
Sure,
mentioning
sure.
about the role of the ICT, especially in the higher and the school education. So quickly, means he was mentioning that just by provide means there is no need of setting up complete infrastructure, means digital infrastructure in each school and college. So there are a lot of government initiatives actually. If these government initiatives are means brought to the notice of individual institutes, schools, colleges, I think they can take lot out of it. I will just take name a few schemes. For example, we everybody knows about the SWAM, means that is the learning platform for the cell. Then in this budget also the government has given special emphasis on the Swayam Prabha, that is dedicated channels for all classes from class 1 to class
Yeah.
12. Then we are having the dedicated the national digital library, means lot of resources are there, means all the resources are placed in one place. Then we are having the virtual labs which was developed way back by IIT Madras in association with Amrita University. Then a very beautifully designed and developed e-yantra by IIT Bombay team, that the robotics and embedded system lab and experiments are there. Then the IIT Bombay again the intervent means one more product from IIT Bombay was uh, that was spoken tutorial. So spoken tutorial was one. NPTL was a age-old concept, and all of us are familiar. Means government, if you will see, government at its end is doing a lot to create the digital repository, and there is no need that individual institutes or individual government or individual bodies first of all should do that much of task actually in doing the hardcore development of the infrastructure. That is one thing. Means whatever has been developed actually, we can leverage, everybody in the country can leverage those facilities. So this is one thing. Then second comes in the higher education, especially about the quality of education. And if we are talking about the quality of education, content of education again, then lot of again I will say the liberalization has been done by the regulators, especially if you will see the UGC regulation. So UGC has allowed up to 40% of learning in the blended mode. Then recently, in probably in the last month only, they've allowed around 900 institutes to offer online degree programs. Basically, we are probably most of you will be aware of a very successful program of IIT Madras, where they are offering the BSc program in the data science, and around 12,000 students are enrolled in that particular program. So in that way, basically means using the available infrastructure, there is every possibility that everyone, means all the institute, can harness these available opportunities. So this is there. Now the challenge part is there. I will come to that also. That what are the hurdles, what are the challenges in that area. But before going to that part, first of all, let me answer what you asked about, that the complete skilling ecosystem. So again, a very fundamental, you also rightly said that whenever we are using the word skill or skilling, so immediately the attention goes toward the blue collar job basically. And in the present perspective, it is not basically the scaling. When we are calling scaling, so it is just type first time scaling, then it is absolutely reskilling, and then upscaling. So all this part actually constitute the broad spectrum of the scaling ecosystem. So, for example, I will just give a small example of my university. In our university, being the first of its kind of university, we are the first state on skill university.
Yeah.
So, what we are running in our university, the basic skill course that goes up to the level of electrician, barbender, construction, masons, plumbers. So that is one spectrum. But at the end, we are also running in our university the programs in the field of mechatronics. We are running programs in the field of robotics. We are running programs in the field of automation. So actually, these parts, basically artificial intelligence, IoT. So these are the parts of upskilling, or you can say sometime that reskilling also, because as per the it's lot of published report, lot of old jobs will become obsolete and new jobs will come, and new jobs will be in this emerging area. So the skilling means skilling a youth or skilling a person in an upcoming area, so that he will be able to manage his livelihood. So in the very simple definition, we can define it, and that may go at the different levels, means that may include the blue collar, it may have the white collar also, service sector, industry, means all those aspects will be there. So this is basically the scaling, and the university like ours probably will set up some example that the scaling is not only the electrician plumber, but it is much more than the electrician plumber. It can go up to the artificial intelligence or the data science. Everything are part of the scaling ecosystem. But generally, this area was a neglected area for long, and skilling was tagged that something which will be taught in the ITIs only, or some local skill that training centers who are running operating from one or two rooms and giving some basic trainings basically. But now, in this national education policy, again, this perspective has completely been changed, and government is giving special emphasis that at least 50% of the student must be enrolled into the vocational education, and not specifically means on the vocational education. For example, in our university, we are running a program that is Bachelor of Vocation. So specifically, we are focusing on the vocation, but the National Education Policy is not saying. They are saying continue with the BWOC type of the program, but at the same time, at least give one vocation or one skill to all the students who are enrolled in the school education as well as in the higher education system. So in the national education policy, the process has been started to embed the skill training from class 6th onward. So from class 6 to 12, there will be some scaling aspect will be there. So all of a sudden, means it will not come all of a sudden after class 10. Okay, that if suppose you can't do anything, so just go and take admission in ITI. So basically, that will become, means skilling or the skill ecosystem will become part of your thought process basically. So some student can think to take it as a career opportunity, career option also.
Sure. Sure.
And in the field of higher education also, the policy is emphasizing that on what we are calling that the apprenticeship embedded
Yeah.
degree program. So whenever there is a degree program, at least a part of apprenticeship must be embedded in that program. When we are, when whatever program actually institute is offering, if they are offering simply let's say a BA program or a BCom program, so they can identify some qualifications which are designed, developed by NCVT, and these qualifications which are job oriented qualifications, job role oriented qualification. So institutions can opt this qualification, and they can embed this qualification with the existing their degree diploma program to make a student more employable. So in that way, basically, you will see that this complete ecosystem of the scaling is witnessing a change, and I'm sure that in next 3 4 years only, means up to 25, you will see a means a paradigm shift in the system.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And if I ask Kashyap now, from a so I've seen evolution of Simplilearn, from where it was selling courses to overseas customers to what they have become now in terms of a significant player in India. How are you viewing, Kashyap, this entire space of NEP? What is NEP for you as an organization, a private player who is scaling fast? And what are the opportunities, white spaces you are looking at that are linked to NEP? Right from credit transfers, based courses to etc. etc. So if you can just lay down the landscape from a private player's perspective, it will be good.
Sure. Thanks, Manish. Great to be here. I think before I talk about NEP, maybe I'll just explain, the entire Indian scenario
Sure, sure,
from our perspective, and what are
sure.
the different problems that we see that need solving, and how government and private enterprise can collaborate, right? So at a high level, if we think about basically, when we think of education for the country, thought is always this, that the more skilled your people are, that much faster the economy can grow, that much more prosperity can be created in the country. And therefore, the entire funnel starts from primary education, then secondary education, then you get into higher education. Now, in this entire thing, when we look at the data and we look at the different opportunities, primary education, at least the gross enrollment ratio is high. So people are getting into primary education. Secondary education, GER is 60%. So there's a big drop off over there. Then higher education, that is more at 30%. So at one absolute level, you're talking about millions of people where you need to make a significant impact in terms of enrollment ratios. So that's problem number one. Problem number two is the quality of the engagement in education. I think much spoken about issue is that across the entire education funnel, what is the average quality of the teachers, right? That
Yeah,
what is a kind of education that is getting imparted, and what therefore is actually getting assimilated by the students, right? And the third one is that finally there is huge demand in certain sectors of private enterprise where people need talent, and whatever our education system delivers at the end of the day, if it is not high on employability, then it creates inefficiencies for our enterprises. To either it leads to salary inflation, and therefore companies get less competitive, they are paying more for the skills which are very high in demand, or they have to invest a lot of dollars in terms of creating the skills that they will basically hire just for aptitude, and then they will have to invest a lot on their own. Like for example, the IT revolution, right? All the large IT companies had huge education campuses to train programmers, right? So
yeah,
those are the three different spectrums where work needs to happen. Now, if I look at it at a high level, I think one of the biggest advantages, or what I find most exciting about NEP, is that for the first time I see a clear plan of creating a framework, and not saying that the government can do everything. Because the reality is that the problem is so large that it cannot be solved and funded by the government. The only way this can work is that the government picks its battles, saying that this is a problem that I'm going to solve. For the rest, I will create the framework for private enterprise to come in and play their game. Right. So that's really what I see coming through at a very philosophical level. The NEP is trying to do that. That enrollment ratios, primary education,
yeah,
all of those things are problems that the government needs to tackle. But as you start getting closer to employability, that is where a lot of it can move to private enterprise. That you need to be a lot more dynamic, you need to be a lot faster, lot more connected with industry. For example, traditionally, if I think about 20 years back, most curriculum for higher ed programs used to be updated once in 5 years or once in 10 years.
yeah,
Today's reality is that within 12 months to 18 months skills get obsolete, right? New versions come in, new technologies come in. So at that kind of a speed, it's very very difficult if we do not have very dynamic enterprises which are actually playing in this game. So practically the way I look at it, I think our operation as Simplilearn specifically, we are a lot more focused on the last mile, which is people who are in graduation or post graduation stage, and how do we create the skills which are employable, and finally people are able to build careers in the market. And as a result, our entire focus goes towards the huge volume of graduates. I mean, India has a very strong focus towards certain schools of education, like everybody wants to become an engineer or a doctor or a CA or something. The positive part of it is that everybody is already focused on employability. Everybody
Yeah.
is taking these programs because finally they want to do an education that will get them a job, will build a career, and help them move ahead. Now, that's where we see our intervention, that through the NEP, how can we collaborate? How can we launch formal education programs which can result in a diploma or a degree,
Yeah.
following the right guidelines, but at the same time making sure that people who are spending 3 to 4 years and getting a degree, that degree means a lot. It actually directly translates into a salaried job, or gives the person the skill to become an entrepreneur or build something of his own. And that's our core focus area, and that's something that we are very excited about. So the transition for us is that if I look at what's happened in the last 20 years or beyond, people would do a degree, and
Yeah.
I'm leaving out exceptions, but by and large people would do a degree, then they would need to be skilled to take on a job and be job ready.
Yeah.
Getting a degree and getting job ready were two different things, right? And that's where a lot of edtech companies came up saying that people who got a degree, now you do our program, then you will get a job because you will learn data science, you'll learn programming, you'll learn AI, you'll learn cloud, whatever it is, where the jobs are, right? Now with the NEP and some of the policy framework that's coming through, the exciting part is that we see a road towards clubbing these two, that you don't need to keep them separate. It's not that you get a degree then you get job ready. The degree itself gets you job ready. And how do we basically do those kind of partnerships where these programs can be delivered at scale, right? So that's something that is big positive. That's what we are excited about. Second aspect that we are excited about is obviously this opens the doors, like to deliver the kind of education, like if our GER for higher ed is 30%, to take it to 50%, 70%, if everything happens through classrooms, imagine the kind of infrastructure investment. I mean, we'll not be able to do it even in next 15 years. So
Yeah.
the entire online delivery model, keeping in mind that India already has a super high penetration rate of mobile phones, right? So the ability to access online content is already there. Probably it can be improved with desktops and laptops at institutions and stuff like that. But edtech models are able to leverage even a mobile phone, right? And that suddenly changes the game. That you want to take that GER to 60%, you already have the devices in hands of most people. Or even if a student doesn't have it, that's a 2,000, 3,000, 5,000 rupees smartphone that you can buy today, right?
Yeah.
Suddenly the entire penetration that you can create, it's mind-boggling, right? So I think that's broad overview of how I look at it and what I find really exciting about direction that we are going in. Having said that, I think also something to be desired. I mean, I think from a company perspective, one of the things that we do look forward to is more clarity. I think
Yeah.
there is still at the execution level, there is still a lot of ambiguity, and
Yeah.
we are obviously in discussions and talking to the right stakeholders to get more clarity, because there is still a lot of ambiguity on what's allowed and what's not.
Yeah.
So more clarity emerges, the energies of private sector will get unlocked much faster.
Yeah, no, I think that's a again good segue again for Piyush, which is my next round of questions around monitoring and regulation of regulating of private players, especially if you look at the insights from China market. So once China regulation happened, that overnight companies were asked to become not for profit, and then there were a series of regulation that came, especially in the higher ed space, and I think it landed up finally in a very positive direction where 900 universities will be allowed online degree kind of a message. But what is allowed, like Piyush said, in terms of whether they are service provider, what can they say when they advertise, and obviously it started from an advertisement. But I think where it will land up is what everyone is questioning in the higher ed space, how much to invest, when to invest, and how to position themselves. And then on the K-12 space, I see very interesting trend where private K-12 edtech organizations, they with the IEMI, they form a consortium, and proactively they have created a body which obviously to preempt any government guidelines to, in the sense, or I would say not preempt, or maybe co-opt with government to frame a K-12 policy. I think it's a very good move from K-12 edtech companies, and maybe higher ed companies should have also done the same in the hindsight.
So
So over
actually,
to you, Piyush. Yeah,
sorry to
yeah.
interrupt. Actually, I'll just add to that. There is a, industry body that is there with the higher ed companies as well. So Simplilearn, Upgrad, some of the other companies are already part of that. Where the intent is exactly the same, that we have a body that can engage with the government and
Mhm.
co-develop guidelines that work for enterprise as well as address all
Yeah,
the
yeah.
concerns from a user perspective and the individuals out there.
So Piyush, how is government looking at, and if you can spend time on both K-12 as well as higher ed piece, how is Niti Aayog looking at it? And if we can lay down some direction, bring all edtech private players at ease, that nothing will come which will be spanner in the works, but it will be positive in the positive direction. Over to you, Piyush.
Right. So see, I'll start with this with where Kashyap was mentioning about the GR thing, right? So from the current GR of 27.1%, we have to. I'm taking higher education first, since that was what's talked about previously, and we have to reach around 50% by 2035, right? So that's a huge jump. And if you see from, if I talk in like in terms of absolute numbers, right now we have around 3.84 crores of students enrolled in higher education. And in the next 15 years, we are looking at adding 4 crore additional students in the ambit of higher education, and be to order to achieve the 50% goal, right? So as Kashyap was mentioning, that is going to be a humongous task, right? And the current brick and mortar model, we might not be able to, we might not be able to achieve that target if we just go through the brick and mortar model. So definitely there is a need, there's a natural need coming up to leverage edtech to be able to introduce more and more people in the ambit of higher education, right? So that leads to very proactive kind of regulations coming from the government side. Even before the NEP came, or just after the NEP, the UGC came up with a regulation on online degrees, which allowed top 100 NIRF institutions to offer online degrees. And recently, you saw there was a draft UGC regulation out for public consultation, where that has been now the ability to provide online degrees have been given to now 900 more autonomous
Nine.
colleges, provided you meet a certain quality, right, which is coming through the NAC score or the
Yeah,
NIRF.
yeah,
So that's there. And two, see, one of the challenge that we are going to face here, and that's why all these regulations are necessary, from 2 points of view. One is to facilitate the players, the tech players, or whosoever wants to contribute to the cause of increasing the GR in higher education. But two, also to maintain quality, that we produce employable people. So if you see the current employability trend, the current employability in India, as per India Skills Report, which is co-published by AICT itself, is just 46% in across the country. Though it has improved from 34% to 46% now in the past 7 years, which is a welcome trend. But still, there's a lot of work that needs to go here. And we know that there are colleges which do not abide by good quality, and we see a very poor quality of education happening. The
yeah.
condition of engineering education is a case in point here. So that's why we need to be very cautious when we're expanding education, be it in school education or higher education through the EdTech means. We cannot compromise on the quality. Maybe we could, just in the rush to improve the GER. Once we do that, it will be very difficult to undo the things that would have been done, right? And that's why the regulations are pretty much required here. But at the same time, being flexible enough to allow people who are at the NEP says, like publicly spirited private, right? That's the word the NEP has very rightly used. So that is the intent. So we are very much aware that without the collaboration with the private players, with philanthropic organization, the entire agenda of education will not be pushed to the desired levels that is required. At the same time, we are also sure that the interest of the beneficiaries, the students, the parents is getting taken care of. So, as you're mentioning, you're referring to the incident that happened, and which led the ministry to come up with a regulation that we need to be very careful, yeah, right, in terms of getting which kind of tech player that we want to enroll in. So that's what the principle. But in terms of implementation, I would say government is very much open, and that's why the NDR platform was created. Before that, nothing like that was existing. It has been created for school education. It has been in process for the higher education, which will come out soon, and that allows each and every edtech player to plug in their products, and it will be completely free. based on a very objective way of ratings, right? The users will be rating your product and your devices, and automatically it will be shown, okay, this is our topmost product. You choose. It's an open space, right? Everybody is free to choose, the state governments, the universities, whatever they like. And from the point of view of central government, Niti Aayog or Ministry of Education, our role is to facilitate the best possible solutions for school education, all the state governments as well as the universities, and that's what we are trying to push really hard.
Yeah, no, thanks. So before I jump to Dr. Rathore, Kashyap, what are in your consortium of body? What are the salient points that you have proposed to government? If you can outline some of those in, and take this opportunity to just highlight that, that will be interesting. What is it that you want that government should do, which will enable private edtech players to function better in the higher ed space?
So, Manish, at a high level, in terms of basically the guidelines and proposals, the way it is divided is essentially in two parts.
Mhm.
One is basically a set of guidelines which are, the intent of the industry body is more than that these are self-discipline guidelines for all of us. That basically what are the things that we will ensure to make sure that a user's rights are taken care of. That basically finally every person is getting a good product which is delivering good outcome in terms of their skilling if it's higher ed, and if it is basically more for schools, then the parent and the child, they are basically getting the right kind of experience. I think this goes into a lot of detail in terms of product promise, what is allowed, what is not allowed, what kind
Mhm.
of things we should avoid, as well as getting into areas like refund policy. That basically
Yeah,
education products should have a certain minimum refund policy, that in a certain period of time the learner has the ability to get his money back if
yeah,
after joining the product also he feels that this was not meeting his expectations. And this is again a very critical aspect, because
yeah,
I think this again Piyush touched upon earlier, that one of the big challenges of education, online or offline, is the uniformity of learner level does not exist. You have
yeah.
some learners who are able to grasp very fast. There are some learners who need a slower pace of learning, and therefore a lot of times the impact of the program is also driven by the person himself. That basically himself or herself, is he or she ready for that program. A lot of times you end up getting very excited saying that this program will take me to this level in my career, but
Mhm.
when you get into the program you figure out that this is either too basic for you or it is too advanced for you, and therefore the education policy should have certain refund criteria which companies adhere to. So I mean, these are the kind of things on the securing the user side of the journey.
So,
The
so, so Kashyap, just say this. So, apart from refund, what are the other two, three salient points on the user side?
So, for example, the kind of salient points are again this, that in terms of basically making a claim on a product,
Yeah,
what kind of claims are permissible, what kind of claims should not be there. So, for example, very, very, exciting or gimmicky claims saying that, this
mm.
much placement rate or career hike, or those kind of things. So on that there is a set of guidelines saying that basically there has to be very strong backup data to basically make those kind of claims. Otherwise the claim should be more on the product efficacy, that basically these are the tools covered, these are the labs covered, these are the skills covered, because those are absolutes. But in terms of outcome claims, how do we basically safeguard that outcome claims are well backed, and it's not that any company in the space can get irresponsible in terms of basically claiming
Yeah.
flowery outcomes which don't have backup data. So it's more around that in terms of what kind of claims that we want to put out as a responsible set of edtech companies. So it's more around that what kind of claims
Okay.
do we have, and
Got it.
how do we have defensible data behind it.
Okay.
so
Great.
so
And the
this is
second, yeah.
yeah, so this is on the user side. On the other side, the kind of help, in fact, that the areas where we want help is to basically have clear guideline of all the different education institutions, that whether UGC institutions or AICT institutions and so on, having a clear policy on what kind of partnerships online companies can do with them, what kind of online programs can be launched which are in the degree diploma space, etc., and having stability of policy, so that basically if we can get a slightly longer term horizon saying that these are rules that are accepted, saying that if these programs are, you go through this process, and if you go through this process, if it is approved and we take it live, then there is clarity under NEP that basically this is something that there won't be a change of policy or something like that, because that's one of the policies. Stability is something that is a must for investments to follow. That basically once that comes in, there are few programs that are working well. There aren't any dual signals. I think right now perhaps we are still in that formulation phase, and there are still so there are certain doubts that basically
Yeah,
if
yeah.
we launch this after 6 months, will it continue, will it not continue? I think there is some fuzziness on that from the industry perspective, and that's where we are looking for help from the government side, saying that more long term clarity that helps us to unlock investments and move faster.
Okay, okay. Thanks, Kashyap. Dr. Rathore, any comments on monitoring and regulating the private space? Otherwise, I would want to move to the next section about equity and equitable access. But any comments before we move to the next section?
No, I think Piyush has brilliantly covered it. That
Hmm.
basically check and balances are required to safeguard the interest of the student. So that's why all these regulations. Otherwise, there may be a lot of misuse, or actually the information what Kashyap was also mentioning, that whatever the claims are there, actually in fact means facts are not basically supported with all those claims. So definitely this check and balance requirements means regulatory regimes, and definitely they are changing, means it is not as rigid as they were initially.
Sure. So Dr. Rathore, you were mentioning about plethora of free access tools available on the higher ed side, right? From IIT Bombay and other institutions. Now, the challenge which I've seen and which I've got a lot of feedback from is the usability of those products, in terms of effectiveness. And maybe people have not tried it, people don't know about it. And there is a parallel platform in K-12 where I've been involved through Central Square Foundation, Diksha, where we're seeing good traction in terms of teacher generated online content. But in both the cases, at times quality of content that is being churned out, because it is at an early stage in case of Diksha, because teachers started creating content, good quality content will bubble up eventually once this movement's longevity is ensured. But how do we make sure that, and this is linked to the point in NEP also about equity and equitable access. If I have to go to bottom of pyramid, and I've said that in various panels now, I will just repeat it here, that I am looking at edtech from four levels. Level one being multiple devices, people with multiple devices. Level two being smartphone with very good internet connections. Level three being smartphone with low internet connection, low electricity, and level four being non-smartphone users, which is also significant in India. Now if you look at these levels from your perspective, as well as and obviously all of you can pitch in, what are things that are the enabling factors now? What are things that we need to improve further? Where is it that we need more government support on? Where is it that we need more private companies support on? Because these segments are obviously not profit generating segment, when they need incentives in the initial year. So just thoughts, and this is open to all three of you. And it is also from the perspective of how can we enable more private and public partnership to address equity and equitable access.
So the first thing, actually, the fourth point, actually, just I would like to add something on the fourth vertical which you were mentioning, that the limited access to the smartphones. So the first, even if suppose means as per the data which was published by the ASR, that was on the school education, that around 67% of the household are as on date having the access to the smartphone, means the households are having the smartphone. But another important thing is that that household is having a smartphone, but how much it is accessible to the student for taking the classes for the purpose of training or study, that is another challenge basically. So average data is that up to 27% time that is not accessible, even the smartphone is there in his house. So that is a challenge. And that disparity is not actually a standard or that is a national average, but if you will see, it varies from state to state. Means in Kerala, the accessibility to the this tech instrument is up to 92%, whereas in the Bihar it is means maybe less than 50%, and again the accessibility to that smartphone is maybe less than that 50% again. So first of all, the challenge of infrastructure, that how that challenge of infrastructure can be substanted, that is one thing. And here comes the role of government definitely, because creating infrastructure, development of infrastructure, that may go to the government segment, and its operational part or the continuous development part, as Kashyap was rightly mentioning, that the contents are changing so rapidly that in each 6 month, 1 year, or 2 year, it completely get changed. So that dynamism should be there. And if suppose the infrastructure is created by government, and then its operational part may be handled by the private entities. But again, the challenge will come, the what you rightly mentioned about the profitability aspect. If suppose half of the population or half of the student, if suppose we talk about the school education system, 25 crore students are there in school education, maybe half of them are in the government schools. And if they are in the government schools, so paying for any value addition or paying for the purpose of quality, again maybe probably somewhere a bit difficult for these segment of the student again. And especially in rural segment, if you will see, means you will be aware that we are having number of schools. Means if a total number of schools in India, probably they are around 15 lakh student, sorry, schools. So out of those 15 lakh schools, probably 1 lakh schools may be there who are with uh, means understaffed school basically, and there are number of schools without a teacher or a single teacher. So if suppose a single teacher is taking 5 subject up to class 5th level, so how to address that challenge of quality, even if the private sector is pitching in to bring the quality? First thing, there is no profitability in that. Second, there is so much of diversity that one teacher is teaching 5 subject at the same time. They don't have the access to the internet, or they may not have the access to the smartphone. So how to address all these challenges? Probably all department should
Sure.
sit together to find some solution out of this.
So Kashyap, your thoughts, and you being the private player on this panel, how, because this is something that always, so I've been also part of various organizations, always back of my mind, how do we address this part of India, and because they are still not being touched in the real way from online perspective. Your thoughts?
So, Manish, see, I think when if you think about this in terms of all the different actors in this, right, from government, institutions, private sector, um, I think there are two aspects that are top of mind for me. One is that private sector will always be more focused on the profitable side of the population by definition. That basically there are finally the companies exist to deliver a return and they are for profit. And one of the things that also creates the disruption and the very fast scale opportunity is the profitability of these companies. So I think the entire China example that you were quoting, I think they are getting into some of this correction after 20x scale has happened.
Yeah.
Had they thought about some of these policies on day one, it would never have scaled at all. So
Yeah.
what will you correct, right? So I think that is one thing that we need to be cognizant about, that for private companies to create impact, if out of the entire population, if private companies are able to create impact for the top 40-50% of the population, that will be driven by the for-profit model. I think government's attention is much more needed for the bottom 40%, because there practically the for-profit model will not finally deliver results for them. And that's where the government needs to basically think about how that can be addressed. And a lot of the initiatives seem to be focused on that. Like, for example, on the entire higher ed skilling side, most of the large enterprises, because of the costs involved, uh, the kind of product investments, kind of sales and marketing investments, and so on, the products end up being either at 50,000, 1 lakh, 2 lakh, 2.5 lakh kind of price point to do a program in data or programming or digital marketing and so on. Now, obviously, the affordability of these programs is limited to the top 40%. It doesn't go below that. However, the NASCOM Future Skills platform or other platforms which are being developed by government participation, that is where a lot of private companies are actually opening up their content for free. That
Yeah.
basic e-learning content, basic videos, all of that is available for free on these platforms. And while it would not be as outcome delivering as the core product of the edtech company, where there'll be lot many more interventions, etc., but definitely all of that content, so that's the kind of role that private companies can play, that we can open up our content for social good, for being part of these initiatives, and make it open so that at least the content is available. Now, on top of that, however, government will have to intervene to figure out that how can outcomes be generated for the bottom of the pyramid as well. That's a difficult problem to solve.
Yeah.
But
So,
I would add one other point, which is something that which requires equal amount of thought. Is that again, going back to the skilling discussion we were having, that vocational skills, carpentry, plumbing, and all of that versus new age skills, which are where a lot more jobs are getting created. Now, one of the fundamental things is that a lot of the content for higher education and driving white collar employability um, is all in English language, right? And one of the larger things for everybody to figure out is more this, that in terms of accessibility, how do you get people to a level where they can access these things? Even all the free content on all new age skills is all available in English. And I don't think the economic forces are going to drive translation into all vernacular languages. So one of the larger problems is also this, that I think when we are thinking about the primary education and secondary education problem, how do we make sure that those problems are being solved to get people to a level of at least basic appreciation of English where they can then learn on their own? Because otherwise, and while there will be a lot of different views on this, that
mhm.
we want people to learn the vernacular language and all of that, and all those things are well respected and understood. But the reality is that if you want to get a person to a level where he can learn on his own and learn fast, right, English is the language where a lot of stuff is available on the platter, right? And
Yeah.
that's a different problem statement altogether, that we will take all this content and convert it into 20 languages. I think we have enough on our plate as a country to you know not be able to do that in the near future.
I think YSR Reddy would be very happy with your pitch on English. But without getting into that, one example which comes to my mind, which is very interesting. So again, part of Central Square Foundation and IIT Bombay project called EdTech Tulna. So they recently come up with a framework where they asked 4 or 5 private players to themselves get rated on EdTech Tulna parameters, and then Central Square Foundation went to Rajasthan government, and Rajasthan government, for their procurement for schools software, used EdTech Tulna framework for procuring content from for-profit players. And where I saw very interesting linkages where IIT Bombay, Central Square Foundation, government coming, creating a framework to get softwares into government schools, where obviously for-profit players are getting paid the way they get paid, but the process and the transparency created because of EdTech Tulna was very interesting. So I think there are also a lot of interesting examples like these. Diksha obviously is one where a lot of bodies have come together to create an interesting initiative. Piyush, your thoughts about this? This is, I think, a very dear thing with Niti Aayog, and a very important thing, which is equitable access and equity when it comes to edtech, particularly.
Right in the beginning of my, one of answering one of those questions, I mentioned about the kind of penetration of digital infrastructure in India. If you see like the smartphone penetration we are talking about, like 67% of the households do have smartphones. But if you see the usage of those smartphones, there's another study by USR which clearly shows that hardly 27 to 30% of the kids in the rural part of India, or for that matter, the entire country, have access to smartphones all the time. Which means only those 30% would be able to access the content if you are sending it through WhatsApp or sending it through whatever mechanism possible. Now, the another 30%, they do not have access to smartphones at all, despite having a smartphone in home. The third segment, they are able to use the smartphone once in a while. So the equity question becomes really, really important here. If the government decides to, go totally into online education, or I say, let me rephrase it like this: if government is taking totally into this WhatsApp-based or mobile phone-based education, a large section of our society will remain out of the reach of education. And if we and since we'll have to procure the software, the content, or let's say we have a platform, we take on lease a platform from certain tech player, and the and that will be a huge investment, right? The number of people getting the license to get into that and access that platform. So that is one model. Now, given the current scenario with the penetration of smartphones and all other digital infrastructure, the second scenario is whether what we do is, for example, PME Vidya, through which one channel for one class in multi-channel, not 200 channels would be there. So from the government points of view, we do try to push um, as much as I take possible. But at the same time, we also take into consideration what will happen if we focus more on this as compared to what the masses are having access to. So that's when too, for example, a mohalla class, it is when during the COVID was tried widely in another project called Saath with Niti Aayog is doing with Jharkhand, Madhya Pradesh, and Odisha. So there we were emphasizing heavily on mohalla classes because we knew in these three states the condition of digital infrastructure within the houses. Even if you see the TV penetration, right, the overall India has a TV penetration of 67 to 70%, while in Jharkhand the number drops down to 40%. In Bihar, that's around 30%. So with that number, even the one channel, one platform thing would not work out. And this 40% TV that we are finding in Jharkhand, that might be only be in the houses which already having smartphones.
Yeah.
So in totality, we are talking about a huge section of society who do not have access to TV itself. So their innovations, local innovations, which are very much needed in those contexts, are required, right? So as Kashyap was mentioning, this section we couldn't think from the lens of profitability. We have to think from the point of equity and everybody getting the same quality of education. We can't deprive a certain section because they do not have access. So we have our energies and our resources have to focus on areas where most of the people able to access education. So that's why you will see a lot of graded worksheets were distributed to the remotest part of the country. Mohalla classes were a big hit, and wherever possible, loudspeaker and TV and radios were introduced, given more priority, and then your WhatsApp based or content was distributed. So we'll have to go slowly into this, and we are trying to push a lot to improve the digital infrastructure. And it's always easy to have a community based infrastructure, maybe in a school or somewhere, rather than having one to one device model, right? So many to one device model will absolutely work in India. If you see the budgetary allocation towards education, you take any government for the past 20, 30 years, it has stagnated around to 12 to 13% of the entire expenditure of that state. That's the national average, and every fair somewhere around that. So that's also a reality. So when we are projecting for private sector, for government sector, we should be considerate of all these factors and then design the best possible way. We might not be able to emulate completely China or for that matter Singapore or USA. That is not our context. Our context is very different. So we'll have to have a mix of both the things where we'll be able to do justice to all the students in our ambit.
Great. So we are almost run out of time. I will just do one last round, and probably the team will allow me to do that. Just how do you envision edtech in 2030? And just 30-second views on that, and what will be edtech doing 2030? Kashyap, you can begin. Yeah.
Yeah, Manish, the way I see edtech, I think edtech in India right now is at a very interesting cusp. There are world-class companies that are getting built here. While there is a lot of focus on solving certain problems for India in terms of complementing and supporting the school system as well as working on higher ed. So I think throughout the entire funnel, there are different companies which are trying to solve different problems. The most exciting part is more this, that these are well-funded companies with enough access to capital and solving this problem with a lot of investment on product and innovation. I think with the right kind of framework, there is huge impact that can be created, and we can solve. The private sector can play a large part in solving a lot of the problems with help from the government and the policy framework. So I think I find the entire NEP to be a step in the right direction. I mean, being very clear, saying that we want to create a policy framework to let private sector play and operate, that itself is a huge, very, very
Yeah.
positive starting point. The other thing that I find super exciting is that most of the companies are thinking global. So this is also a sector for the country at large that we hope that all of us will be able to make the country proud the way, let's say, pharma industry has done or IT services industry has done. So edtech is another sector that is coming up at a very
Sure.
different scale. I think a lot of these companies have a genuine shot at having globally large businesses and creating multi-billion-dollar companies,
Yeah.
and that's what I'm
Got
super
it.
excited about.
Dr. Rathore, your 30 seconds on where do you see EdTech from skilling perspective 2030?
Means overall in 2030, this edtechs will take the education as well as the scaling into the metaverse. Means all the students will be doing experiments there in the virtual
Yeah.
lab. All the learning activities taking place in the metaverse. There's no crores of investment in setting up of the mechanical and electrical and civil labs. All those simulators and virtual labs
Yeah.
will be there to do experiments.
I look forward to that. Piyush, your closing statements from
I'll
2030
see
vision.
the entire way of delivering education is going to be digital in 2030. Mostly, most of the part or the component of it will be digital. On the equity front, you will see people who are denied seats in top premier colleges in India because of limitation on physical infrastructure will have a shot at getting the best education and degrees. As Dr. Rathore was mentioning about the BSc programming program course from IIT Madras. So certain more such kind of good quality education will be accessible to, let's say, a person in Bihar and UP, and getting access to the best of the education which he or she couldn't have because of other limitations, right? So that will be breaking the barrier and will make knowledge accessible to more and people. And once you have more knowledge and access to good quality education, will be breaking your shackles of poverty and move out of poverty. So I see this particular online education paving a way for people in the remotest part of the country to break out of poverty and make the best out of it.
Great. I thank you all for this wonderful conversation. Uh, Abhinav, over to you.
Thank you so much, respected panelists, for such a meaningful and a deep, insightful discussion.